This is Priscilla Svensson, and you're listening to The Pastor with No Answers.
All right. Thank you for the energy put forth in the greeting there.
Yes, guys, welcome.
Priscilla, you really are a very revered person on the show. Every
Are you
time
making
you're on,
fun of me?
No, every time you're on here, people are like, "Oh, I like Priscilla."
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Well, Maggie, it's good to have you on here.
Thanks for having me.
We hopefully our listeners will be able to pick up on the friendly dynamics in this room, because not only am I married to one of our, you're not really a guest, you're a host, married to our host, and we're super good friends with Maggie. Known her now for 3 years, maybe?
I don't even think it's been that long. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, how long?
Yeah.
It feels like longer.
I met you guys in December of 15.
Gotcha.
So almost 3 years.
Wow.
And I will say it is pretty weird when you think about the younger people that we've befriended. Because seriously, we don't have to think about it too long to remember how much younger Maggie is than us, but just in regular conversations, it's not like we're thinking, oh, super young person. We're just thinking a peer that we're talking to.
Have people told you are an old soul sometimes? Like you're like very playful and fun, but you can hang with anybody.
Yeah, no, I've gotten that since I was very young.
Yeah.
Just the fact that I can put on a very serious and wise demeanor. And I think that's actually because of a lot of the stuff I've been through.
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, that's
you're a
fine.
friend, and then I forget. Like sometimes if I reference something, you're like, I don't know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so young. Like you're not my age.
Well, and I was in any conversation with you guys, I never think that the reverse. I never think, oh, they are.
She's over the hill.
I may lose these guys anytime.
Now I feel like people are thinking I'm a baby, so I just want to say I'm 25. I'm not.
Yeah. Thanks for setting me up.
Did you like our high school graduation present we gave you this year? The student Bible.
Yeah, I remember the conversation Joey and I had, because at one point we wanted to figure out if he could be my biological father.
I believe that I could be, for sure.
Yeah, you just had to have, it was like 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of dudes have gotten women pregnant at 15. I wouldn't call them women.
This
They're
starting
girls.
to take a weird,
Girls and
uncomfortable
boys.
So Priscilla, no.
Yeah, oh gosh.
All right, so we do talk a lot about mental health on this episode, mainly because of yours truly. I've talked about it a lot on here. And we've had who I would think are pretty gifted counselors on here, wise people just in general. But I'd say what we really love is hearing from folks that know a lot about it from experience. And so I've been able to have a lot of people on there to talk about it. But what is most interesting about this episode are the recent means in which you kind of explored to help you out. Mm-hmm. But I'd say before we get into your excuse to use hallucinogens, I was hoping we could get like a little bit of a background, like what, if you were in like a mental health support group and someone said, okay, Maggie, you're next, share with us, what do you struggle with?
Okay. I've struggled with anxiety and depression my entire life.
Yeah.
Just recently did I find out that they're all symptoms of PTSD. But as far as what I've realized that I've struggled with, because PTSD is a diagnosis, but very sharp and sudden bouts of depression that have lasted for long periods. I mean, I think the longest was probably about 6 to 8 months of just
nonstop, no relief
depression. And anxiety, random bouts of anger.
Yeah.
I mean, just like this constant thought that there was impending doom always waiting to happen. Then social anxieties as well, just always assuming that anybody I was hanging out with me because of pity, and that I wasn't actually really liked or valued.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, a lot of paranoia as well. My dad kind of set that up for me, but I'll go into more of that later. But just kind of always like expecting something bad to happen, or that somebody was going to try and hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was throughout a lot of it.
When you are not in those mind frames of, like, let's just take the social delusions of how you're perceiving others. When you're not struggling with that, can you take an objective approach of that's not rational? I know that.
Yes.
But when I'm in it, I can't do anything with it.
Yeah. And there's I feel like I've had a kind of a tug of war a lot of my life with that of being able to have this rational mind saying, well, if they really didn't like you, they wouldn't have you around.
Right.
Like they would not have invited you.
But you could be their project.
Exactly. Or it could be that
you're not our project. We're friends.
Such pity. Oh yeah, I know. Mm-hmm. The sad, sorry little girl. We just brought her into our home. And that's like one of the times that I for sure knew somebody wanted me. I had friends that were all going to Not Scary Farm together.
Yeah.
And I wasn't their first invite or second. I was their third. So like a girl that couldn't go. Then they invited a second girl and they couldn't go. And then I was like the third down their list. And that to me was super comforting.
Right.
Because it was just like, oh, well, I wasn't their first pick, but I was on their list. So it wasn't like, oh, like this pity thing. I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah.
And the way it worked in my head makes way more sense than I could ever verbalize. Mm-hmm. But
I never knew you felt that way. I mean, did you ever think that of us? Like, we're like,
oh, 100%.
Oh my God.
You thought we were project managers?
Not project managers, but I mean, I like Priscilla a lot. I'm gonna go into girl crush mode. Yeah, you're just like such an upbeat and an enjoyable person to be around. And I think that in my healthiest moments, I really gravitate towards people like you. And so in my most unhealthy moments, I fear losing that friendship the most.
So I know that. Yeah. You're my friend, girl. You're my girl.
So in the past, yay or nay for things you've tried, like regular prescription drugs?
Yeah, I tried prescription Zoloft for the anxiety and depression.
Any success there?
It almost immediately worked really well for the first few weeks. And then it progressively got worse until I finally stopped taking it because my anxiety was just... absolutely through the roof.
Didn't try anything else after that?
Not as far as drug prescriptions.
Right.
I was doing therapy for a while, and that wasn't really getting anywhere. And then I went to a different therapist, and it was helping a little bit more, but it just still felt like there was this huge disconnect between what they were telling me to try and do mentally and what I was achieving.
Yeah. And you're definitely... person that seems to think and process a lot. So do you read articles on stuff that sounds maybe similar to stuff that you struggle with? Have you read books, watched little documentaries, or like any sort of investigative stuff like that?
I did that a lot. And then my father is diagnosed bipolar disorder, and so I was always fascinated with personality disorders. So when I was a teenager, actually, I would just have like these sudden bouts of depression and be really sad and then be really angry. And so to try and make sense of it, I self-diagnosed as bipolar when I was a teenager because it now is very obvious that that was from the trauma, that those mood swings were from being exposed to some really traumatic stuff. But at that point, I didn't have any recognition of it. So yeah, I totally dove a lot into psychology and just various amounts of things. My husband was in the military and went to Afghanistan, so I actually read up on PTSD, but didn't have the self-awareness to realize that all of these things applied to me.
Yeah, definitely. Gosh, that's so interesting. Like when you think of let's see how to word, well, I don't want to go there yet. Have you had any history of illegal drug use?
No, actually, I haven't even smoked a cigarette.
No cigarettes.
No cigarettes. Didn't really start drinking until 22.
Wow, so you're even legal then.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Well, backstory a little bit. And my dad is also an alcoholic, so I was very wary. I didn't even really. I mean, I think the first time I ever got drunk was maybe like 2 years ago.
Right.
1.5. Yeah.
Right.
Something very short.
Yeah.
So I was highly sensitive towards substance use.
Yeah. Any attempts at weed or anything like that?
Nothing.
So basically, you are not this woman with all these experimental days of drugs and tripping and all that stuff, but you get an invitation to what kind of therapy?
It's MDMA assisted psychotherapy.
MDMA, and what sort of drug is that?
That's ecstasy or Molly,
And
as
Molly.
the cool kids call it.
I had therapy with Molly.
That shows how out of it I am. If somebody would have asked me what Molly was, I think I would have said marijuana. Yeah. Of course I know what Molly means. It's marijuana.
I wonder, our St. Bernard growing up was named Molly. It's my therapy.
So how did you get introduced to this opportunity? Did they find you or you found them?
No, I found them. So actually, I'll refer to him mostly probably as my husband because we're still technically married, but we're separated.
Yeah.
So actually, after we were separated, he was listening to podcasts, and this podcast on the Aubrey Marcus podcast was on MDMA assisted therapy, and he's like, "Hey, you should give this a listen." And I mean, it just deeply resonated with me, like with the patients that were talking about it and the doctors, and gave me such hope that I actually went online and looked up to see if there were any trials, because it's still getting approved by the FDA, if there are any trials happening anywhere near me. I mean, I think I cut it off at like if it was in New Orleans. I was like, the furthest I'll go is New Orleans.
Right. Dang.
But yeah, I mean, there was one here in Charleston.
Whoa, so you're like, no brainer.
I have to go for it. I have to do this.
And that wasn't guaranteed either. You had to get evaluated.
There was this whole process of calling. So I first called and said, "Hi, I heard about this trial and would really like to participate." And they took down my information as far as like my address, because you had to live in a specific area, my number and my name. And they said, "Okay, we'll call you back when we're starting to evaluate people." And I said, "Okay." So then I had 3 or 4 phone interviews. And then once I got through the phone interviews, I had an in-person interview. And then there's all this legalistic like paperwork that we have to go through, and making sure I have a kind of PTSD that they can quantitate, since it's researching, it's still in research. They have to be able to see if I had less flashbacks and less out-of-body experiences and stuff like that. So if I had enough to where they could gauge it in their research.
Yeah.
So
was the waiting room where they're like naked women and people playing pool?
I actually didn't think about the waiting room. I'm actually interested in the waiting room too.
I was actually joking, like it was a non-credible place.
Okay, here's something really funny. So.
You really were thinking of the waiting room?
You made me think of it.
Oh my gosh.
Well, what's really funny is the trial that I did isn't even in the hospital. It's not at MUSC.
Yeah.
It's at a house in Mount Pleasant that's been converted into like a therapy place.
Whoa.
But it's actually like you go into a back room and they have like a futon and chairs and a couch.
Yeah.
So it's very much a home that's been converted into an office type setting.
Yeah.
But
Was
then
it comfortable?
it was comfortable, but they did have they had a bunch of books on LSD and psychedelics and therapy and stuff like that. And then they actually had an art piece by the guy who created LSD on the wall. So it was.
What did it look like? I'm curious. Like, what did
It's
that?
Really cool and imaginative.
Here's the ironic thing. It wasn't.
Really?
I mean, it was an interesting piece of art, but it was like a self-portrait, and this guy always drew himself as a big ape.
Yeah.
Or like a monkey.
interesting.
Or gorilla. Actually, I think it's a gorilla. But yeah, so it's just this white piece of paper with it literally just a black outline of like almost cartoonish gorilla. That's all it is.
Oh.
And I asked him like, what's up with the gorilla? Like it's not like really fine detail or anything. And being an artist, I was just like, yeah, okay, I want to know why they picked this.
Yeah.
And they said that it was an art piece by the guy who created LSD. I'm like, okay.
Dang, that's interesting. The people that to like get back on track if I derail a little bit, but the people that you kind of were interacting with, what was their age range or vibe, or like, because it's somewhat of a progressive, I mean, not even approved by FDA yet. I'm just curious kind of what the vibe was of the people you were working with.
Yeah. So Sarah, there's two Sarahs. Sarah Sadler is the secretary. So she was my first point of contact for everything. And then there was Sarah, my therapist, and Xenia, I think he's technically a psychiatrist. And so I had two therapists the entire time, Xenia and Sarah, and then Sarah Sadler. And those were the three people really that I interacted with the whole time. And they were just so upbeat and welcoming and very calm. And what's interesting is all of the therapists that get approved to do this, that are in the trial, they have to go through training, and they actually have to do the therapy themselves. So they take MDMA and do the 8 to 10 hours of psychotherapy. So that they understand what the process is like.
Right.
And what you could feel. And,
And so I feel like the entire time it was just a place of understanding.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to describe that.
So some groundwork. In South Carolina, ecstasy on the streets is illegal, right?
Yeah.
So, and then this place is not approved by the FDA. So they have a different, like, do you know, I mean, and you may not even know the yellow tape, but do you know, or that's after
red.
a murder, right?
It's red
tape. Wrong color of tape. You may not really understand the murder
caution
scene.
tape.
But like, did they have to apply for some sort of an amendment of the law based on medical research? Like or do you have any idea? I'm not doubting the credibility. I'm just curious how it works.
No, honestly, I'm not sure.
Because medicinal marijuana is against the law here. So I don't think a doctor could prescribe it.
I'm not sure what that looks like. Yeah. I do know that because it's in zone 3 of FDA approval, so zone 3 is the last zone.
Yeah.
That there's it's a little bit easier and more understanding because it's further down the process of approval. Because I know zone 1, there is a lot more hoops and stuff to jump through. I know that they keep everything in a safe, in a locked room, and all of it is numbered and extremely monitored. Yeah. For obvious reasons.
Yeah. It sounds very professionally done.
Yes. Yeah. That's the entire time that I was with them. I felt like it was professional and safe. Yeah. Really.
Yeah. All right. So having a little bit of experience now with LSD, we'll just keep it a little general. How do you feel about recreational LSD use? Like if someone were to say, oh yeah, LSD is awesome, probably every Friday night, do you think loser? Do you think, wow, that's actually probably pretty good for you if you can do it in moderation? Like what do you think about non-medically guided LSD use?
I think that it's extremely risky. Yeah. For several different reasons, but the main one being that through all of this, I've found out that hallucinogenics typically bring up stuff we haven't dealt with. Yeah. So that's really kind of how they process in our bodies. Scary. Yeah. So that's why people would qualify something as a bad trip, because it brought up some trauma from your past. But because your brain is still in a space where it wants to repress that, it then warps that trauma into, some really crazy insane imagery in your brain and you experience a bad trip. Where in this setting, I am intentionally going in thinking that I'm going to be bringing up trauma. I have 2 licensed therapists there with me that know how to help me process, sit in an emotion, go through an emotion and not, because as we'll talk about, some of my experiences during the drug sessions were very intense. And if I wasn't in the setting I was with in mindset and intention, I would have been extremely messed up afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, walk us through the process. You said you've told us a little bit about your initial meeting. And so there had to be a screening process to see if you were good material for what they were wanting to do.
Yes.
And once that was established that you were, what was the next steps? And did you ever feel at some point, like, were you apprehensive, or once you decided to do it, you knew you wanted to do it?
Ironically, just the entire, even through before I was fully approved and accepted, it was just something I felt so much hope towards.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the day of my first session that I had any second doubts.
Yeah.
But that's just really how my anxiety formats.
Right.
So I got through all of the preliminary stuff, and then when it officially started, we do 3 sessions before the first drug session to kind of just fully assess where my trauma's coming from, what my trauma looks like. And then after,
so like a lot of kid talk, like when you're growing up, and who'd you spend most time with, and what was your relationship like with like those sorts of conversations?
Yeah, the great thing is, though, I feel like they didn't really guide that way. They ask, okay, so what traumas have you experienced, and what does that look like, and what has that manifested like? And because of all of the preliminary stuff, I already feel like we had a pretty good grip on what that looked like. So it was more, what is this manifesting in your life now? What do you experience when you experience flashbacks?
Yeah.
How is the trauma manifesting itself in your life?
Yeah.
And then, some talk about, okay, like, well, what happened with your dad, and
right.
That type of stuff.
Yeah.
And really, because the meat of the therapy is during the sessions, there wasn't a whole lot. Each session beforehand is an hour and a half long. So we do 3 hour-and-a-half long sessions.
So you do the talking session before you get on the hallucinogen, and then you talk again after that?
So you meet, so the first time that we meet, and when I was like officially part of the research study, is an hour and a half, and we just talk about my trauma. We just talk about, okay, what does this look like? So that way, when we go into the drug session, the first drug session, they know what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
They know what to expect.
Right. And
there's a second one like that, and then the third one is actually the day before. So we did my drug session on a Saturdays. So Friday night we met and went over all of the rules of, like, I couldn't eat after midnight, and no caffeine in the morning, no alcohol within 12 hours, that type of stuff. We have to go through if I have been on any medications the week prior, right. Making sure my system is just ready and healthy for the drug. Then Saturday morning I get there at 9:30ish, go in, I take the drug at 10, we talk for about 30 minutes, and then I put on blinders and headphones with music playing. Wow. And that's how I enter into the drug experience.
Did you get a little shaky and nervous and scary? Because you're about to trip on something for the first time blindfolded. And you've probably...
Why did they do that?
Did you develop a trust with everybody, or were you like, what if this is like a really weird place they're going to...
So here's where
brainwash
how do I get out of here?
Here's where the really funny Maggie's anxiety comes in.
Did they know that you had anxiety?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's why there's all the preliminary and the other 3 meetings. They fully knew what kind of things I struggled with. And we have a whole talk about, they say, anything that comes up. So even if you have a feeling and you feel, I don't feel like I can talk about this, talk about the fact that you can feel like you can't talk about it.
Yeah. Say everything out loud.
Yeah. And just, there's just a space of openness, like if you feel like you're scared of us, bring it up, like talk about that. So they did totally know about all my anxiety and stuff, but, they have somebody drop you off and pick you up the next day. So you're actually there for over 24 hours. So while my friend M was driving me, she's actually been on this podcast before. I started going through my head, like, what if all of this is just fake? Like, what if this is just like a big crazy setup for like sex trafficking?
Right.
And, like they have a whole 24 hours. Like nobody expects to hear from me for the next 24 hours, and I'm like willingly taking a drug. And what if it just makes me pass out? And like all of these.
True. I mean,
that is true. Wow.
They could have been an underground sex trafficking.
And then on top of that, like I've only talked to 3 people. I only talked to the 2 Sarahs and Xenia, and I'm like, what if I didn't ask for any credentials, and what if this isn't what they say it is? And then like they have a whole 24 hours before anybody's gonna even come looking for me. And then I'm willingly taking drugs. They don't even have to force me to take drugs.
And now, in all honesty, even it being over and done with, you still don't know. What if they did something to where this time in 2 years ago you're gonna like turn on humanity and be like,
Joey.
No, trust me. Once you go through the experience, you're not worried about that. Ecstasy doesn't make you worry.
Maggie
about
is now dangerous and trained.
I definitely am a trained spy. But no, and then what's even funnier is because it was just like a house in Mount Pleasant. It's like not official at all.
Yeah.
And then I managed to calm those fears. And then when I took the drug, and the reason you asked, Priscilla, the reason they have you put the blindfolds on and the headphones with music playing is because it's a really gentle space to enter into the drug experience. You're not taking in all of this sensory stuff, which I do really think is an amazing way to experience ecstasy.
And so is it as simple as like to answer the question, well, why LSD? Is it because of what you said a bit ago that it's really good at bringing back memories? So is that as simple as it is? Okay, well, this is going to bring back memories, then we'll be able to talk to you about them, or is there any other facets of the whole thing?
Yeah, so just to be clear, it's actually not LSD.
Not LSD.
Yeah, so LSD is a
ecstasy.
different. Yeah, ecstasy and LSD are different.
Yeah. You kept saying LSD every Friday night, and I was like, I don't think that's...
Maggie finally had to say, just real quick here.
just for people that might be confused.
There
2 different drugs.
Yeah.
I was taking ecstasy, not LSD. So there's a lot of different things. I mean, it makes the endorphins, the happy parts of your brain, open up and receive better stuff. So you're in a completely different mindset. And then I personally experienced just this opening of being in a place where I was no longer ashamed of what I'd been through and the feelings I had because of it.
Yeah.
And so I was able to voice these things. I mean, in the therapy that I had been in previously, I always felt like I had to hold back wherever I was at because I was just going to be too much for anybody,
right.
Even people I was paying to talk to. And that feeling was completely gone.
Yeah.
So this feeling of openness and of acceptance of myself and what I've been through, and then it does help bring up the memories and just kind of experience my life in a different set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is like my goal when I do these things is, instead of having weird questions and worrying about how they're going to come across to our listeners, I just ask them.
Yeah.
Like, I've never been on ecstasy. What if these people were crooked, given the different the mind altering state that you were in, could they have had a higher chance of taking advantage of you, like sexually? Like, is it that sort of impairment to where you're just like, ooh, I don't even know what's going on?
No,
or is it, I've got logic and here's some other stuff going on?
Yeah, I feel like it's almost a hyper awareness.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like I was experiencing all of the world. I don't know, like, air feels different.
Yes, I want to try new air.
I know. I'm like, this is getting dangerous. Joey's gonna want Molly.
But on top of that, it never was like, if something were to have happened, like either of them tried to do anything inappropriate,
right,
I definitely feel like I had enough awareness to stop it. I might have been a little bit clumsy or lightheaded because of the drug, but as far as knowing that something inappropriate was happening, totally, like that, you're still in that mind space. And I think that even further developed into being an awareness of the trauma, because I feel like so much of my past was normalized by my father. Like so many of the things that he did to me, he normalized. And it wasn't until that first session where I started to really realize how not okay they were.
Yeah.
And in that, I do think that if something were happening to me while I was on the drug, I would be able to better identify it not being okay. And especially with emotional or mental abuse, like if they even try to verbally say something that was skewed, I think I would have been able to better identify it in that
because you're
stage.
Concentrating more, or there's a deeper level of discernment,
like
I think
awareness.
there's a deeper level. Yeah.
So an argument then, there are drugs that can open your mind to do things that it shouldn't be able to do in its natural state. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't say shouldn't be able to do in its natural state. I think it gives you a better handle
or
on...
not should as in morally, but it wasn't created to do that naturally.
No, even in that sense, I disagree. Right. I think that it gives... So I think because of the trauma, my brain wasn't able to do things that it typically should have been.
Right.
And then on Ecstasy, it was like my brain was refiguring out, oh, I can do this properly.
Yeah.
And since then, I feel like my brain has been able to better process and handle things. And so I feel like it's almost like giving a mechanic a wrench.
Right.
You know, like you can get this off with your hand for sure. But using analogy. A wrench makes it easier, makes it more secure, makes it faster.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I feel. Like it's not necessarily taking apart something that shouldn't have ever been taken apart. It's just giving you the wrench to take it apart faster.
Yeah, like I think the word would be efficient. Like it seems like you can more efficiently enter into all of the things you want to try to get through, especially if it's kind of way deep down there. Just like you said, when you would go to another therapist, you felt inhibited because you felt you'd be too much.
Yeah.
And it would help like relax you. I was like kind of applying like my own experiences. I've never done Molly or anything like that, but like I think about drinking a glass or two of wine and how much more I can let go of being OCD about the house or being able to just relax, because I usually can't relax until our house is tidy downstairs or unless I have 100 candles and like I like to have a certain mood so I can enter in, because it takes me a while to relax, and I feel like a glass of wine can help me more efficiently do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And just like with a glass of wine, you know, obviously efficiency can be like something that helps you do something efficiently can also then be a hindrance if you use it improperly.
Like if you need it every single time to relax.
Exactly. Yeah. If you cannot relax without the wine, then that's a problem.
Yes, exactly. I was just going to say that too, because I think, I don't know, like when you were saying the blindfold and I was going to call it earmuffs, headphones.
Yeah.
Earmuffs. I immediately thought of yoga. Like for me, sometimes if I can be disciplined enough to start my morning with yoga, which I very rarely do because I'm not disciplined enough to get up before the kids and do that. It like takes me about 10 minutes, but I do all this stuff to like help you center yourself. And I just feel like that is so healthy for me to start that way.
Yeah.
And so like, that's just what it reminded me of, is just sort of helping you center in a little and focus and not be.
That's exactly what it does.
Mm-hmm.
So another funny story, my first session, we talk for about 30 minutes and they say, okay, it's probably a good time to enter in. That's what we call it when I have the headphones and the blinders on, is it being inside. Mm-hmm. So they're like, it's probably a good time to go inside. And so did all that. And I'm sitting there, and this is the first time I've ever taken any kind of drug. Mm-hmm. So I'm, waiting and they're just sitting there watching me, they're just waiting patiently. They're there. Y'all aren't
talking or anything?
No, they're there the whole time, and they're very quiet when I'm inside. And then all of the anxiety just starts flooding my system. Yeah. And it's just like, well, what if I'm the one defective person?
Right.
My dad experiences drugs in a completely different way than my mom does. And we've had a lot of talks about that. I'm like, what if I'm like that? What if I just don't experience drugs at all? Yeah. What if I'm broken? What if this doesn't work on me? And all of the anxiety that I try to just keep under control on a regular, second by second basis, which is unleashed. It was just opened in my mind of like, wow, I'm gonna really fail. This is gonna be terrible. And I eventually, and then on top of that, I had a very controlling, abusive father. Like, I wasn't comfortable I've never been comfortable doing things on my own and like making my own decisions. I've always second guessed myself and had to call my mom and call my sister and call my best friend and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And get everybody's information, and then I'll make a decision, and then I'll, doubt myself for the rest of the time. And so the session is very much like, okay, well, you take the blinders off and the headphones off when you're ready. Yeah. And you can always go back in when you feel like you need to recenter and start to process more internally. And that to me was just like, what? You're not going to tell me exactly when to put them on and take them off. Right. I'm not comfortable with that. You can just tell me. No. They're like, no, you can trust your inner healer. And so I was sitting there also with part of my brain going, what if you're just not a person who works at all? Like, you just don't work. Yeah. My other part of my brain was going, also, have you been inside too long? Are you going to be sitting here too long? But what if you take it off and it's been too short? Right. Yeah. What if they're just sitting there completely bored, waiting for you to take all this stuff off?
You were worried they were bored.
Well, so this is like definitely the slow rise of the drug. And eventually I take it off and I'm like, and so that's what I start talking about, is all of the doubts that was going on in my head. And
at one point, did you had to outwardly express to them, okay, I feel it. Life is kind of good.
Joey can't wait to get to the drugged part.
I'm really interested.
Yeah. So what was really funny is even before I took the blinders off for the first time, my skin,
I was a fish.
I turned into a mermaid.
It was my lifelong dream.
I looked down and my legs were fusing together and getting scales.
So my skin started to feel tingly, and I was convinced it was in my head. Yeah. I'm like, no, this isn't the drug. Like, what is this, a drug? No, it's just my head. It's a drug. No, it's my head. No, this is all the anxiety. Your skin feels tingly because of so much anxiety. So eventually I took it off and I told them, I was like, yeah, I'm having a lot of anxiety. What if this doesn't work? What if I'm inside too long? I know you guys said that that's not a thing, but what if it is? Right. And so we just kind of explored why I felt that way. And that's kind of where I started to realize, like, wow, all of my decisions in life, I second guess because I wasn't allowed to make them as a kid. Like, even when we had birthday dinners, you got to choose your fast food that you got for your birthday dinner. But even then it was in the parameters of, but it had to be something dad liked. Yeah. Or, just stuff like that. Like, there was always you can decide, but here's also these extra parameters. Right.
Or this piece of control. You never fully had control.
Yeah. There was never this wide open space to just make decisions. So, and that's really when I started to realize it was on the MDMA, expressing my terror and just making a decision. Right. As simple as taking a pair of blinders and headphones off. Like, that's really wild. But
well, just a side question, when you're saying that you like always would call your friends and second guess and doubt, like me knowing you the last few years, like almost 3 years, I like, you do not come across that way. You come across very confident and like helpful, and you have a lot of initiative. Like, you don't seem to wonder if you're doing the right thing all the time. Like, you seem to actually walk with a lot of confidence. Is that you overcompensating for feeling different, or do you feel like you've kind of overcome that?
No,
as you've gotten older? What?
I think it's probably honestly gotten worse as I've gotten older. I've gotten a lot better at, I mean, I think I've always actually been really great at putting on a facade of not only is everything fine, but everything is wonderful.
Yeah, you do a good job with that.
Yeah. And I think because it was just so much easier to function in this false state of wonderfulness. And that's where a lot of the random mood surges would come up when I was a teenager, because I was always, everything's wonderful, everything's happy. And then it wasn't. Yeah. You know, I had a verbally, emotionally, mentally abusive father. And as I found out in the recent study, I had some repressed memories of sexual abuse come up as well. So everything was not wonderful. So of course my body and you as a person wants to express that, but because my survival mode was like, no, we're just going to pretend that everything is wonderful. Right. It would just randomly, like, huge mood swing come up. Yeah. Huge mood swings come up. So yeah, I feel like because of that, because that's how my survival mode was when I was experiencing the trauma, that's been my coping mechanism struggling with the PTSD, is to come across as confident and sure of myself and upbeat
and happy.
Yeah. And outgoing.
You're pretty fun. I mean, I think some of that is maybe compensating or because of, but do you also feel like you naturally have like a...
Yeah, I think that like without the
kind of...
It remove all of the trauma, that's me.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like you to me.
Yeah. And so I feel like I've become... And that's the other thing is, like, since the PTSD trial, I feel like I've become more comfortable in that and more settled in it. So I feel like a lot of the times before the trial, it was like these really crazy bursts of mania almost. Yeah. Of just like manic happiness, like, oh, I have to do something. Yeah. Because if not, I'm going to
go the
sink.
Other.
Yeah. So it's just like, oh, let's be the fun and exciting Maggie and distract. Yeah. And now it's just like, oh no, I can be the fun and exciting Maggie just because I'm in a good mood right now. Or so there's like a more calmness as well. And yeah, and if I'm not in like the fun and exciting Maggie mode, I have so much more of an acceptance of like, this is just a space I need to be in right now.
You're
I don't
nicer
need
to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so much nicer to myself.
That's good. That's more peaceful.
So you start, you kind of describe the mental condition with how more in tune you are with things. Is there also like would you call it a euphoric high to where things feel good as well? And then we'll answer that first. And
during the drug or just now in general?
Oh, no. Just during the trip.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. My first trip, it was...
and do the doctors call them sessions? They don't call them trips?
Yeah. Well, I think the majority of the time we call it sessions.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I feel like our vernacular is a little bit mixed, but we also call it a journey. You're like, I take the drugs and they tell me to have a good journey.
All right.
And go inside.
Yeah. Go inside, have a good journey.
I like that though. I do feel like words are so really powerful.
Peaceful.
I would love to join Wreck-It Ralph in like an ecstasy trip. Like visit him. Wreck-It Ralph? You never seen Wreck-It Ralph?
I don't actually have not seen Wreck-It Ralph.
Oh, that's great.
So I don't know what you're talking about.
They're going to the internet in the new movie. All right. Go ahead.
Sorry, total detour.
Have you seen that? Do you know what he's talking about?
No.
Okay.
Wreck-It Ralph?
Which is weird. I love kids movies.
I know. You love Moana.
Yeah, Moana. Well, that's because Moana is me in another life form. Anyways, total. So yeah, during the first trip, I felt the tingly and the letting go of some of my anxieties and acceptance and kind of like the analytical part. But it wasn't really until the peak that I was like, oh,
yeah,
this is what ecstasy is, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I could feel my entire soul and my body all connected as one.
Yeah.
And then like I could feel a furthering of the universe outside of myself and inside of myself, and it all being one as well. And it just it was kind of like this woven pattern almost of like, you can look at something like a really beautiful fabric piece and this center of it, or just like one part of the fabric, and and it's like this really beautiful detailed part of the fabric, and that's what you identify as you.
Yeah.
But then you move outside of that small detailed part, and then there's like your body, and then even further is all of other humanity, and then the world, and then the universe, and it's all one woven fabric, and that's how it feels like.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, what's crazy too is a lot of Christians, they hear everything being one, and there's a knee-jerk reaction of, oh, well, that's got to be evil. It seems like through any lenses that actually makes sense. Like let's just say the narrative of God creating everything is correct. Well, it's like we're all one. We all came from God's hand. Or let's say it's the Big Bang without a God. It's like we all came from the same thing.
Yeah, we all came from this energy.
Yeah, it seems like a deeper realization of the universe would include the fact that, oh my gosh, we're connected to everything.
We're all part of one big fabric.
Right.
Yeah. So it was amazing is not even a word that really applies.
Right.
Like that falls short
right.
of the experience.
Which is interesting. Do you have any desire to do it recreationally? Like, is that something that you're like, I want to do that more?
Yeah. And honestly, with, I think, a proper setting.
Yeah.
And also knowing, and that's the other thing, is because Molly gets cut with a lot of different stuff, you don't really know what you're getting.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, most of the time it's cut with cocaine.
Yeah.
Or other methamphetamines, because ecstasy is an amphetamine.
Right.
So yeah, you never really know what you're getting. So if I were to ever take it again, I would definitely want to make sure that I could know, what I was actually getting, and that I was doing it in a space that I felt safe and comfortable in, because I can totally see becoming so overwhelmed while on this drug.
Yeah, I was like, I think the few times that I've done weed, like an edible or smoking, and I hated the experience. I thought it was terrible. And just like you were saying about your parents, like how different drugs were for each of them, like how each body maybe process it, or personality, or how your brain even feels when you're like whatever. Like, to me, I love a glass of wine because I know exactly how much I can have before it's too much, because I don't like being out of control. So I'm not a big fan of getting drunk. I'm not a big fan. And I have a similar background as far as an alcoholic parent, but not abuse like you've had. But so I don't have an interest in like being out of my mind all of the time. And what I did not love about that terrible experience with weed, I don't know if it was with something else, but I mean, I was hearing voices. I felt like I felt like I was getting really, really cold, and I couldn't stop shaking. And I was like, and now I have to wait for this to get out of my body.
Yeah.
Like it was like all in my system, and it just, I felt like I had no control, and I just hated it.
Yeah.
I hated that.
And here's I'm going to say unfortunate thing just for this context, that since I haven't done any other drugs, I have nothing to compare it to. Yeah. So I can't even say like, oh, well, this is so different than weed. I have no idea.
Yeah.
On top of that, I have any desire to try weed. I've never really enjoyed the people that I hang out with and they're high. I mean, I just don't like.
Yeah,
I
if you're not high and other people are high, that's boring.
Yeah,
and dumb. It's like annoying.
And then I feel like when I was on Ecstasy, like here I am, I'm like intricately talking about all of this trauma and feel like I was speaking probably more in depth than I have when sober. I don't know. I haven't had super awesome experiences of hanging out with people when they're high, so I just have no desire to try weed.
Yeah.
And I also think that intention is a lot of it. You know, if you're intentionally doing any kind of substance to escape something, and I feel like most substances do a really good job of actually bringing stuff up. So if we're taking a substance to escape and then something is brought up, and then like I said, because we're trying to repress it, it gets all warped and weird in our head, and it creates a very negative and bad experience that can even be worsening whatever it is we're trying to bring up and deal with and not dealing with, and then you know, this back and forth in our head, that it creates really toxic environments.
So during that state, is that when they began to actually do some therapy? Like, or did they let you come down from it a little bit, or like walk me through that once you felt kind of the peak of the high? What happened for the rest of the session?
So I mean, it's a very much a back and forth. I will sit there and talk with them and process. And if I pause or feel like I'm getting overwhelmed, a lot of the times, you know, they'll chime in with, you know, a way of thinking about something, or just stopping me and say, take note of the emotion you're feeling right now. Maybe you want to just sit in that emotion. And and yeah, so then on top of that, they're kind of like, oh, okay, well, maybe, you know, it seems like you might be getting a little overwhelmed right now. Or if I'm just processing for a very long period, they, you know, would say like, maybe it's a good time to go inside and just kind of decompress. And yeah, I don't know. It's a very like self-led process. And that's what I think that their whole intention for it is kind of like Priscilla said, each person is going to handle this drug extremely differently because our body chemistry is different. So that's like, I didn't actually have any hallucinations on it. I had I felt a lot of things. Like, and I said, I could
have
feel
with that dose. Did they say that you may hallucinate?
I'm not, I feel like I have talked to people who've taken Molly before and they've had full hallucinations, but I also don't know if that Molly was cut with LSD, which you do have visual hallucinations.
I thought it was LSD. Just, I knew some friends in college that did Molly and
so I'm not 100% sure if other people do actually hallucinate, but I, like I said, you know, felt air differently and felt like my body was breathing, like my entire, you know, not just regular breathing, like every part of me was breathing.
Were you more emotional, being able to feel more? Like, were there times when you were moved to tears by a thought of your childhood, or laughed hysterically? Like, were your emotions on edge and at a peak level too?
The really funny thing is, I feel like my emotions were way more reasonable and responsive. Because beforehand, my emotions were so out of control. Because a lot of the time I spent disconnected, which is part of trauma. And feeling very numb, and then would have these huge surges of emotions of panic. And you know, I remember Keegan's my husband I'm separated from. And for those of you that don't know, we were in Home Depot, and I had to decide between buying these orchids that were dying, mind you. They were not in good shape, and I wanted to save these orchids, or using them.
Maggie.
Or save the orchids, save the plants, or use the money for something else. And it caused so much stress at that point. I literally broke down in Home Depot sobbing, and he had to pull me into a hug and say, it's okay, if you really want to do both that badly, we can figure it out. But that wasn't what I was crying about. So yeah, I feel like during the drug sessions, actually, like I was sad because something was sad.
Yeah.
And towards the end of my first session, I definitely finally let myself feel all of the pain and terror that my dad had ever caused in my life. And it was overwhelming.
So what was the switch that allowed that? Just something that you can't put a finger on that opened that up? Or was it you were finally aware of it, or were there recollections of stuff that caused those emotions? Like, what do you mean?
So I didn't have any repressed memories come up until my third session.
Okay.
So in this first session, it was definitely, I finally allowed myself to recognize the fact that I was always terrified of him.
Right.
I think a lot of my brain just kind of shut that stuff down, and I didn't let myself feel it.
Right.
It's just so I could survive.
And was that revelation a result of the therapy and the drug, which I know they go hand in hand, or was it just a matter of the ecstasy's effects?
No, it's 100% the therapy and the drug.
Gotcha.
Definitely with the way that we guided and just talked, and I let myself talk about the trauma. And that's another thing. Like when we first started, before my first drug session, I talked to them about how I felt like I was betraying my father by talking about what happened. And this is like, I'm telling the truth. I'm telling people what actually happened in my childhood. And I somehow felt like I was being this terrible, evil daughter that was betraying my dad. I'm like, all I'm doing is telling the truth to somebody. And so in hand in hand with the ecstasy and the amount of progress we'd made in that session, I finally came to this point of realization, like, oh my gosh, if I knew a child that went through all of the stuff I went through, I would want to do whatever I could to get that child away from their parents.
I just think about when I was actually first getting to know you and you helped me paint the girls' bedroom. We lived in the townhouse.
Yes.
And I still have visuals of that, like a side visual, like Maggie's an artist. So I am kind of a mess, but when it comes to like painting and stuff, I'm a little OCD. You don't even like paint on me. And Maggie had it all over her. Like you were wearing it everywhere. It was so cute. But anyways, we were painting and they had vaulted ceilings and we like knocked out a whole bunch in one night. Stayed up really late. And I specifically remember you telling me about your dad coming in late and coming into your bedroom and just talking to you about adult things.
Yeah.
And I remember when you were telling me, I felt like you were getting ready to tell me that he abused you. And then that was it, which is bizarre that he was waking you up in the middle of the night to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember being like, and he was only talking? I remember thinking that. And of course I wasn't going to say, was he only, because I didn't know you that well. And I didn't want to like presume something. And that was your dad. Like, so how you've talked about your dad the years that I've known you, your parents, like you have a fierceness about your family. You really love your family. And I always feel like there's like this, you acknowledge that your relationship with your dad wasn't healthy, but I can tell you love your dad. Like it feels like, or at least to me, it felt like you still had this, maybe a loyalty. I don't know what the word is. Like it's something to where, and maybe you were even his favorite or something.
Yeah.
Like it kind of
he
verbalized
that. He constantly told me that I was his favorite. And I don't know if I know he verbalized it later on to my sister. I don't know if he ever did to my brother. I have an older brother, a younger sister. My mom and dad.
He told your siblings that you were his favorite?
I know that he told my sister. He started to say things to her like, why aren't you more like Maggie? I only love Maggie. So
terrible for her, but terrible for you too.
I mean, because then think of like my sister and I are still very close, despite my dad really trying to rip the two of us apart. And yeah, I mean, that just causes so much problems and pressure on a kid to like always be everything that dad had ever wanted me to be. And then add on to the top that there was just deep emotional incest. Like I talked to my mom about this recently. I told her, I'm like, Mom, do you realize like you and I, so my parents are still married, that you and I were so close growing up, you know, like, especially as I started to become more of a teenager and could just talk about dad so much. And she's like, yeah, now that you say that, I can realize that I definitely didn't recognize that at the time. And I said, yeah, it's because he made me his emotional wife. Yeah. So it was just like, we were like sister wives, but like mother-daughter wives, which is weird. I mean, that's not okay. And then on top of that, not even until my last session did I realize how much I never told my mom about it. And I've talked to her, I've told her a lot, not everything, but a lot of what has come up. And, you know, I asked her, I said, Mom, do you feel like you knew any of this? Because I feel like I'm finally realizing I never told you, because he would wait until she was asleep. And he was very good at manipulating me and making me feel like at first felt like I was special and that, you know, there wasn't anything that needed to be talked about. And it wasn't, and you know, when I finally started realizing that I didn't want it and it wasn't okay, I wouldn't even say that I ever, until I was like 19 and it moved out, realized how much it wasn't okay. Yeah. Like when I was in the situation, it was just that I didn't want it anymore.
It was your upbringing. So that was like normal.
That was normal to me. That was what a close father and daughter relationship looked like. And so talking to her and her being like, I feel like I failed you. You know, and hearing that come from my mom, and my mom and I are so close, it's terrible. And she really, I mean, like, saved the reason why I'm like a normal functioning human being is because of my mom.
Yeah. You always speak so highly of her.
Yeah. And so I just also feel like so sad that she's now finding all of this out, and then also feels like she failed me, which isn't the case. You know, like, she had no idea how badly things were going on. She knew that every once in a while he would come into my room and wake me up. But you know, it was like, it's like standing next to a Monet. If you've ever seen a Monet in person, especially the ones that span like gigantic lengths, if you're standing next to it, you're like, oh, these are some weird, funny colors. But you don't see that they're lily pads until you get all the way across the room. So I feel like that, like, all my brother, my mom, my sister, and I were all just standing really close to this abusive painting and couldn't see it for abuse until we backed up and realized, oh,
Now, is there like open I mean, there's not open communication at this point. So just for a reference for our listeners, I mean, all of this, we're talking within the last couple of months. What you're describing, this wasn't last year or 10 years ago. Is there any openness now? I mean, I would find it, your dad's not going to listen to this episode, I would imagine. No, I mean, seriously. So do you find there to be a possibility of a complete open door of communication where these things are talked about between you and your sister and your mom and your dad, or is this stuff just off the table that you won't be able to do that?
Well, my sister and I have been talking about it. I mean, like, her and I, she's 3 years younger than me. Yeah. And have been talking about it pretty much since we've started going through it. You know, she wasn't, I feel like my dad did a really good job at making me feel like anything I told my mom about would shame me. So especially when I became a teenager and, you know, started having sexual desires of just like being interested in boys, I felt like I could not be, because that wasn't a good Christian girl. And my dad did a very, very good job at manipulating my Christian beliefs. Right. And, so I feel there was always this like, well, if I tell mom won't love me anymore. Mom's a good Christian woman. And if I tell her about these things I'm struggling with, she won't love me anymore. But my sister, especially being my younger sister, and her being very open towards me, allowed me to be open towards her as well. Yeah. And so her and I have always kind of had this closeness and confidant towards each other. So her and I have been all very open. And because of the environment he created, we were open with my mom so much more than with him. Yeah. And I think at this point he's just so disconnected from reality. There's no point. Right. I mean, I wanted my mom to come and visit me this summer because she's a teacher. So I'm like, you're not doing anything. Right. None of us live in the house anymore. Like, come visit me. Right. And, you know, of course we had to ask my dad, and just no, immediately, just no. And I'm like, you can't spare mom for 5 days. So I got mad at him and stopped talking to him. And he eventually texted me and was just like, are you ever going to talk to me, or is this the end of our relationship? I mean, you're going to end our father-daughter relationship because I'm not talking to you.
Right.
All right. And I was just like, no, actually, I'm an adult and can be upset with you and not want to talk to you and not have it be so dramatic as to end in the, dissolving of our relationship.
Yeah.
He's like, well, can I at least know why you're mad? And I'm like, yeah, I'm mad that you refused to let mom come and visit me for 5 days. And he's like, well, he then proceeded to essentially equate it to the loss of my marriage. Yeah. Like, he equated my mom coming and visiting me for 5 days to dissolving my marriage. He's like, well, you should know how it feels like having what happened to you and Keegan.
Goodness gracious.
How difficult it is to be away from your spouse. I'm like, no, actually, I let my spouse go on a 3-month internship because I supported him and wanted to do what he loved before we ever got separated. Yeah. So it's just like, no, actually don't know what you're talking about. And also,
it's just very selfish.
Yeah. Like a spouse going on a vacation to see your daughter for 5 days is not the same thing as you losing your spouse.
Anytime Priscilla goes on a trip with the girls or like a missions trip or anything, and people ask me where she is, I'm going to say, yeah, we're separated.
She's left me.
We ended things.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know. I mean, just for the week and a half, we're separated.
Yeah. We just put things on hold for 5 days while she's gone.
Yeah, for us, we love seeing each other go off and do something they love, or have a break from the normal chores of life. You know, like,
well, that's also, I mean, like, my separation, for your listeners that don't know, my husband and I did not have a clean separation. It was very, very hard and difficult. Not
your choice.
Not my choice. And this is kind of one of the things that spurred me to get help for my PTSD. Yeah. Is I was not doing okay mentally and emotionally. And, that was back, he moved out of the apartment we were living in back in November. So it's not even been a full year. And it's just like, I live on the other side of the country from my parents. I'm from California originally. And, why wouldn't you not want your wife to go and see your daughter and help your daughter
who's been through hell and back? Yeah.
They know that it's been such a difficult period in my life for me. Like, none of that makes sense. Yeah. From a healthy standpoint.
Yeah, he's just being selfish.
Well, and then he's also totally delusional. I mean, my mom is probably the most faithful woman on this planet, and he constantly accuses her of just horrendous things. So there's this total disconnect. And before I started the therapy, he sent me this text. He's always claiming that he's going to commit suicide. And so he sent me this text saying, like, oh, well, once I commit suicide, I've decided what, I want my gravestone to say. Jeez. And I'm like, okay. At this point, it's so normal to me. I'm like, okay, what do you want your gravestone to say? Like, don't even blink. Like, okay, what do you want your gravestone to say? And he's just like, oh, I wanted to say, like, he may have drank too much, but he laughed a lot and he was loved by his kids. And I'm like, you are so disconnected from the reality of your life. Yeah. Like, drank too much. He is 52 and has maybe 2 more years. Like, his doctors, probably 4 years ago now, told him he has about 5 years to live. Gracious. And if he didn't completely change his drinking habits, and he's only gotten worse. So it's just like, no, it's not that you drank a little too much. Like, you're literally committing suicide via alcohol right now.
Yeah, my dad died in his 50s. Yeah, from that.
And all 3 of your children have moved out as soon as they possibly could, and have only contacted you because they love their mom. Yeah. You are so disconnected from your reality. That I don't even feel. So there was sexual abuse that was repressed that came back up in my third session. And
did you actually have visuals come?
Yeah.
I had pre-visuals come. So I like remember everything leading up to it and a tiny bit of it. And then just like the knowledge of what happened afterwards,
right.
which, from reading a lot about trauma now, and from what my therapist and I have talked about, that's pretty normal.
Yeah.
But
it's like how a person survives.
Yeah. And really, I mean, like, and then the left side of your brain typically shuts down when you're re-experiencing trauma. And that's the side that, categorizes memory and is your speaker. That's how you communicate. So that's why a lot of the times we can't even verbalize really all of the things we've gone through, is because there's this disconnect between the right side of your brain and the emotional impacted experience and the left side, which communicates.
Yeah.
But I truly believe that he doesn't even have any recollection of when he sexually abused me.
Gotcha.
Do you think he was drunk when he did it, or you think he's just delusional that he just decides that never happened, or he would never do that? Or
I think it's honestly a combination. I'm not sure. I was really young. I was 5 when I started, so I'm not sure if he was drinking at all, but I do believe that because of his already existing mental illness and then the further state of just mental deterioration that all of the alcohol has caused and his kind of disconnect from reality has allowed him to repress the memory himself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the end game with the actual therapy, was it because obviously therapy, I think of helping someone with their thoughts and get to a healthier place mentally. But was the end game to find the crux of your mental illness, such as what happened with your dad, and then point you in the right direction? Or do these guys offer prolonged care to where you could have a session twice a year or 3 times a year? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's their end
I know
game?
what you're saying.
Yeah.
So that's what really brought so much hope when I first heard about this kind of therapy, is that it has a beginning and an ending.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much unheard of in therapy up till this point. You do 3 sessions.
Right.
That's it.
And at the end of the session, they're hoping that you know what's the problem so you can get more help, or that they've helped you with your problems.
That you have no signs of PTSD anymore.
Gotcha.
So I might get the statistic wrong, but I think thus far, like 89% of the people that have gone through this therapy do not show enough signs to be categorized as suffering from PTSD after their second session.
Wow. So what is the point? What is healing from it? Like acknowledging and understanding what's been hindering you, and you're able to face it.
Yeah. So
name it and kind of be able to be like, this happened and I'm okay. Is that?
I think that there's a lot. For me, I feel like I'm a little bit different in the sense of I experienced 19 years of trauma, of heavy trauma. I moved across the country at 19 when I got married. Sorry. Just there's just so much to that in general. But yeah,
well, plus when I was 19, I couldn't make any of those kind of decisions. I was like,
I was just trying to decide what team I'd be in NBA Jam.
I was trying to decide what outfit looks cute.
But now I just realize, one, I mean, I always kind of have been a person that when I decide something, I'm very strong in that decision.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I now have the hindsight of seeing how much being controlled by my father was. I moved out. I had started going to college, and he was still so oppressive.
Yeah.
Even from not being in the house. That I think subconsciously I saw marriage as my escape from his control.
Yeah.
And so yes, got married very young, moved across the country at 19, and so yeah, that's why I say 19 years of trauma. Yeah. He still was very verbally abusive as much as he possibly could be once I moved. But yeah, and so there's not this clear defined before and after of my trauma. You know, it wasn't this one very specific event. It was 19 years of my life, and very young years at that. So with most people, I think it allows them to enter into a space where they process what happened to them in that one event. With me, not only was I, you know, like I've talked about, allowed myself to feel all of the terror that I'd ever felt, that my body had absorbed. And in this therapy, we've talked a lot about how just as human beings, our body really does carry any trauma. Like our body keeps that score. So my body has experienced and felt all of this fear, but I didn't let myself consciously acknowledge it. And so I finally entered into a space where I'm like, can give myself the space to feel that. And then the acceptance of validation of like, yeah, that's a totally valid thing to feel because of what you experienced. And then in doing that, I feel like that allows you to also then release it. It's just like, yeah, it's reasonable that you felt that way. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, so you mean I don't have to hold on to it? Like, no, you can let that go. And then it also allowed me to remember the sexual trauma, which just, I mean, it really makes so much of my life make sense. Right. Just in the amount of I stayed away from guys growing up, and how I had deep body shame. Right. And just like, I mean, I've told a few of my female friends about how I used to, anytime I took a bath when I was younger, would always take a bubble bath so I could cover all of the shiny objects in the bathroom with the bubbles, so I would not have to see my reflection, because I was that despised by it. Like, just such deep body shame, and just deep discomfort with sex in general. And I mean, obviously that caused a lot of problems in my marriage, of this like wanting, you know, to be intimate with your husband, and then also feeling deep shame and guilt afterwards, and not knowing why. And now I know why. And in that I can now process it. And I feel like the 3 sessions also gives you just all of these tools. So we're taught how to build our bodies up. We're taught like, this is how you make your muscles strong, and this is how you learn to do math, but we never learn how to process our emotions. You know, there's no class in high school of like, here's what you do when you're feeling anxious or scared or like you're unloved. You know, like we're never given these mental tools for our emotions. And I really do feel like those 3 sessions, it's like a crash course of just like, here is all of the stuff your brain is capable of doing that nobody's ever showed you can do before.
Yeah.
Is that like a little bit, do you think that's like a little bit of CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, like teaching yourself like how to process what's going on with your brain? Or if you feel like you're going down this path of anxiety or whatever, you know how to like retrain its route to go a healthier direction?
Well, I think now I can just so much easier identify it. Like before the trial, I feel like I had a really hard time realizing I was anxious until I was just like deep into the anxiety. And same with the depression. I did not recognize that I was in depression until I was deep into the depression. And by that point, redirecting is so difficult. So now I feel like I have the awareness of like, oh wow, that really upset me. I know that it upset me because it reminded me of this about my childhood. It reminded me the way my father used to do that to me. So I can recognize, one, why I'm feeling that way, why the anxiety or depression is coming up. I can recognize it so much sooner. And then I can also recognize the false like belief that's coming from it. So a lot of my false beliefs that spiral me is that I'm unloved or unworthy. And I can realize like, okay, that's reminding me of what he used to do. That makes me feel like I'm unlovable. And I'm just unworthy of it. I also know that's so untrue. Like, I've felt how I am connected to every other thing in the universe, and that I'm a small part of this beautiful fabric. I know I'm not unlovable.
So did it work? Would you say it worked 100% with what they said they wanted to do and accomplish?
Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
After my third session with the repressed memories coming up, I had 2 weeks of suicidal thoughts.
Right.
And
did you keep in touch with them during that? Or
yes, no, they, after each session, they, so you spend the night and then you have an hour and a half of just regular psychotherapy the next morning.
Yeah.
Then you go home and then they call you the very next day and they call you 3 more times throughout that first week.
Gotcha.
And then you meet either after that very first week or after the second week, whichever ends up working out. So you meet up in person and do another hour and a half to 2 hours.
So they knew you were struggling.
Yeah, no, they were fully aware.
Yeah.
And then they're also on call for me the entire time.
Right.
So if at any point during this entire trial, I had both of their phone numbers and could call them at any point and request a session or just to talk to them. So yeah, they were very aware of it and actually reminded me of some of the stuff that I had said during the session of like, hey, remember you talked about processing it this way and you saw some beauty in it this way. So I think did a really beautiful job at reminding me of my own processing strength. But yeah, those first 2 weeks after my third session were just extremely difficult. I feel like almost heightened PTSD at that point. I mean, I have a coworker that reminds me of my dad in just the way that he's controlling and manipulative like that. I could not be around him. Yeah. Because it made me lose my shit. Yeah. But after those 2 weeks, I feel like I've had so many experiences that I'm not stewing in this anxiety. I hung out with some friends and just, was driving home and realized that at no point during me hanging out with them did I think that I was only invited because of pity at all. Like not a single point. And it was only on my drive home where I was like, oh, I just functioned that entire time with not a single ounce of self-loathing or fear. Because that's another thing. I was constantly afraid of getting raped. I mean, just like in the most absurd manner. I mean, I've also had a lot of absurd things happen to me. Like I've had a guy try to force me into his car before and just some other really crazy stuff happened to me in my life on top of the trauma I had already experienced. But that was like a constant oppression and that's gone as well. It just is like, well, I mean, if somebody were to ever try to harm me in that way, I fully feel capable of handling it. Yeah. Like even if it were to pass that the person succeeds in trying to harm me, I do feel like I can still mentally handle that afterwards, which is, I mean, just an astronomical thought to have.
Yeah, it's like you exercised. You've been like working out.
Yeah.
Through that therapy.
I have emotional strength.
You're like beast mode now.
Maggie got swole.
I do think there's so much power in naming something. Like I feel like just from personal experience and watching other people go through things, like it's so much better to face something than to redress it or avoid it or call it something that it's not, just so you don't have to face it. Like fear is so controlling in a person's life. And then to face the scariest things that could be happening to you or your biggest fear and just face it and then name it. Yeah. It just doesn't have a hold on you anymore. Yeah. Especially if you're naming it, it's outside of yourself. Like when they say to go inside, like then after you go inside, you bring it out and tell them about it. Like it doesn't sit in there and control you through fear.
Exactly. And it's almost like in a scary movie, never fully seeing the monster. It's always in the shadow. And it's like, if that lives within you, like never really knowing fully all of the fear that's inside of you, but knowing that it's there. And then finally like, okay, no, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to find that fear. I'm going to express, like, just let myself sit in it. There's this poem called The Guest House. It's by Rumi. And
my sister loves Rumi.
It's fantastic. It talks about like entering.
What if Rumi was someone's roomie? That'd be cool. I'd say my roomie is Rumi.
Maggie thought that was so funny.
I love puns. Anybody that's pun-larious can be my friend. Anyways, it talks about entering in each emotion, whether it be joy or fear or anger, into your house as a guest.
Yeah.
Meeting them at the door with laughter, saying stay as long as you need, but not any longer than you need. And I really think that with the drug sessions, I can truly do that to my emotions now, where it was just like
That's good.
I was listening, I think, to this podcast called Typology, and they're talking about 4s, and I'm a 4 on the Enneagram.
Yeah.
And we oftentimes become the emotion we experience, and they talk about, realize that you're the ocean, not the wave.
Right.
And that's kind of what I feel like I've been given the tools to really recognize, is that there are these emotions and memories that I have experienced, and those don't make me up.
Yeah.
They're a part of me, but that's not all of me.
Yeah.
And I just feel like it's been a really beautiful, amazing journey. And it's wild that it has only been like start to finish 5 months.
Yeah.
I do think you also, some people just naturally haven't, some don't. I do think you have a pretty decent amount of self-awareness. And I think that worked in your favor doing that, because you really went after having this therapy because you were aware that you were not doing well. Yeah. And you want to do well. Like you do have that drive in you to be better. Yeah. Which is something you have. Some people will become just a victim to their own self. And as much trauma as you've gone through, even just this last year, on top of your childhood, you're a fighter, so you have that in you. Yeah. Which totally worked in your favor, because you want to do it and you're self-aware and you're a learner. And I think, I don't know, that's probably why it was so efficiently, it worked efficiently on you as well, because you did the work. Yeah. You put the work into it.
Well, that's, I feel like, another thing about this therapy, if you're not willing to put in so much work, there's no, it's very intense in the simplest word for it. But you do, it's not just, I go to, 3 non-drug sessions and then do a drug session and do 3 non-drug sessions. And then, that's not it. The entire week after each drug session was so emotionally difficult for me, because I just you drag all of this stuff out that needs to be processed and needs to be handled with, but that's difficult. So there's this like whole week of just like difficult emotions and processing, and then it continues. Like I feel like really it's almost like, what are those weird contraptions, like a marble rolls around and
the labyrinth or whatever it's
there's some name for them. I feel like that's really what it is. Like the drug session kicks the marble, and then you have to do all of the other work to get the marble all of the other places,
and that's like good. I feel like that's just a good mental picture for anyone wanting to get better in anything. Like, I hope that people listening don't think that they need to try to figure out how to get into this Molly study so they can get better. I think that was like really great. That was a thing that worked for you. But people need to not be lazy about getting better. You don't get to go to a therapist and then they fix you. They're helping you fix you. There's no way it's going to last.
With PTSD, it is a bit different, because so much of like your processing capabilities are in the left side of your brain. Yeah. And they've done brain scans, and the left side of your brain actually shuts down when you re-experience your trauma. So a lot of it is like, people have just for years and years and years have tried this therapy and that therapy, and have really put in the effort and have made next to no ground on their PTSD.
No, that's good.
So I do think that it brings so much hope in places where people have just been struggling and trying and putting in the hard work and not making any ground, because that's really what I had kind of felt like. I didn't know that I had, that what I was struggling with was PTSD. But like you're saying, like I had so much awareness that it's crazy to me now, having gone through this drug trial, and realizing how much I was lacking even in that, of like being super aware and really trying to get better, and just like not
you
even
didn't have all the
knew.
right tools.
Yeah. It's just, you know, like I was trying to change my oil once, and somebody definitely put my oil filter on with an oil wrench, and there was no way I was going to get that sucker off.
Yeah.
Like I could lay it under my car and I, you know, just like try all of the things I wanted to try, but unless I had that one specific tool, it wasn't going to come off.
No, that's a good analogy too.
All
yeah.
my mechanical references. I'm a welder, by the way.
Yeah, but I wanted to tell our listeners that with the experience that you have had with this, what do you call them? A firm, doctor's firm. What would you call their business establishment?
A study. It was a study.
Yeah, a study.
Yeah,
I would say
a
study.
A medical
you are
study.
actually starting your own, so people can come and get Molly from you, and then you'll talk to them. Right?
Maggie's got Molly.
Yeah, Maggie's Molly service is definitely not a thing. I'm still figuring out how to handle my own crazy. Can't handle anybody else's.
That's your next T-shirt I'm making you.
Maggie knows Molly.
For her birthday, I got her a shirt that said "Resilient MF."
Because at one point, I feel like there just needs to be the backstory for this. After struggling so much with suicidal thoughts and depression after everything that happened with my husband and I was in a really good mood, and Priscilla and I were hanging out, and
Joey was here too. You were telling both of us.
And I stood up from their couch and just was like, I'm a resilient mother.
She has this amazing long blonde bouncy hair, and she was like moving her head, and she was like
All of
cheerfully
the
saying
sass.
she's a resilient mother.